Hello and welcome. This is the session that we presented at the district workshop in January, and it is new year, same tech, new ideas. My name is Brittany Coomer, and I will be the one facilitating this session today. If you wanted to pull up the slides, they are on a short link right here, so you can just type that into your browser. Otherwise, they're linked on the agenda of all the session resources for this particular workshop. So some of the goals for this particular session are to identify some ways to integrate some fresh new options for engagement, representation, and action expression in the learning environment. So using tools that maybe are familiar to you or that you found that your students really liked or worked well in your learning environment from e-learning and putting a more fresh spin on those, because after having lots of extended e-learning last spring and into some of the different circumstances we've had this year, sometimes it's nice to use something that your students are familiar with, but in a different way to keep things fresh and exciting and different and new for them. And then ideally by the end of the session, set a goal to implement one of these strategies or activities in the new year. So some of the why behind this, I kind of started to get at this already, but using familiar tools in a different way can be a less intimidating, overwhelming option for your students because they know how to navigate the tool. It's just applying their understanding of that in a new way. So you have to spend less time reteaching, coaching them how to use it, because they've already kind of been using that tool in the first place. So the way that this worked in the live session is I pulled up a poll and we voted on what different tools we would like to learn about and new ideas related to those familiar tools. So if all of the tools aren't new to you, maybe some of these are brand new ones, you haven't used these with your students before and you want to, that's perfectly fine. For all of the resources, I have linked a basic getting started guide with them so you don't feel like you haven't used this before, you're starting from scratch. But we voted on these, and I'm going to go through the ones that we did in the live session because this is a half-hour training, and I kind of built some more options on here than what we could cover in a half hour, but they are all linked there if you need them. So the vote that we did, teachers really wanted to learn about Jamboard, and then in a tie for second place were FlipGrid and Google Slides. So those are the ones that I'll cover, but the other resources are linked on here. So just to give you a helpful hint here, I have linked all of these to go to the specific intro slide for that session. So if you wanted to click this, it'll just take you to the Jamboard pieces. All right, so here we are. I set this up so that it's kind of a little bit of a familiar way that maybe you've used this before, and then the examples of new ideas that you can use it. So Jamboard is a digital whiteboard tool. It became really popular during e-learning in the spring, partly because it was the first time we had it widely available to everyone. It had been a paid feature of Google that was only available to certain districts that were Google for Education partners, and then Google unrolled that out to everyone. So everyone had access to it, and now you do, and it's not going away. So usually teachers use this to demonstrate a concept. They're illustrating on the board. It is interactive, so your students could be working on it as well with the teacher, but it's most commonly seen in classrooms as kind of an exit ticket, a formative assessment, a quick check. It's most commonly used as a formative assessment tool or primarily by the teacher to present something in a different modality, ideally on a digital space, because maybe they don't have access to a whiteboard. So the ideas here that we have for using this in a new way is which one doesn't belong, would you rather, and why, and then digital manipulatives. So some of the examples that I provide on here of how you can use it in a classroom context might be for a specific subject area, but ideally you can use some of these skills and integrate them into your learning environment and apply it to your subject area. So the first one is which one doesn't belong. And sometimes I struggle to find examples for math classes, but a lot of the ones I found for Jamboard are math related. This has been a very popular tool amongst math teachers in a variety of grade levels. And there are the little symbols here to indicate kind of where it connects to the UDL guidelines as well. So this one, which one doesn't belong, is a fun twist on using a prompt in conjunction with Google Jamboard. So the idea here is that you give students a series of images, equations, whatever have you, and the students ask themselves, which one doesn't belong? And there's really not necessarily a right or wrong answer sometimes. It's just students practicing defending their answer and analyzing what you present in front of them. You could set it up to where maybe there is a right answer and that's a part of it, but a fun way to do this and make it a little bit more creative and higher order thinking is to not give students a prompt that has technically a right answer. It gives them practice analyzing and defending it on their own. So a lot of the math examples that I pulled this from are from a specific website, which is totally free to use. It was actually created by a bunch of different math teachers. All right, so this is what the Jamboard looks like. So just to give you an overview here, you have all of your Jamboard editing tools. On the left, you can add written drawings, you can select items, add post-it notes, pictures, shapes, text boxes, and there's a little laser pointer for when you're presenting. The cool thing that's fairly new on Jamboard since this spring is that now you have more options to customize the background on Jamboard. So what I did here is I actually inserted a picture as the background on Jamboard. Why would you do that? What's the benefit? Benefits of this is that it allows you to set a background and formatting that your students won't be able to drag and mess around. That was one of the things that people were struggling with Jamboard, is teachers would add all these instructions and pictures and things and then add layers on top of it, and students could select and move all of those different pieces, and that wasn't necessarily what they wanted. So this is a screenshot that I took, and I set that as the background. It's this little option here. You just upload the picture from your computer, your Google Drive, whatever you're working with, and it adds it here. And again, the only downside is that if it has hyperlinks and things, your students can't click that because it's a picture, it's not a hyperlink anymore, and you can't insert a hyperlink directly onto a Jamboard. But it does give students the instructions right here, and I don't have to worry about them deleting this or moving this to a place and resizing it. I don't want them to. Another nice thing to know here about Jamboard is that you can have more than one frame, and a frame is this space right here where you add content. I'd like to call it slides because it looks like a slide, but technically the correct terminology in Jamboard is a frame. And that's where I put this prompt for the students to answer. So this top menu here is where you can add additional frames if you need to. Maybe this is a collaborative Jamboard. All of your students in your class are working on this. They're responsible for a certain frame. They get a number, they grab it, they put their work on here, and you're good to go. The other way you could do this is maybe instead of it being a class project and you're all working on it together, it's individual, and the student has their own prompt here and they just work on it on their own. So in this specific example, the students would use an external website, Desmos, and they'd create their own little chart here that would be a part of this prompt. The cool thing with this prompt is that it takes students thinking a little bit more to the next level. They're not just, they have to analyze the ones that are here, think about how they're related to each other, how they're similar, how they're different, and then take that understanding and apply it to add their own example of an image here that could either go along with these or not, and then type out their response. So to add their response, they could add post-it notes like what I did right here, or there's a little text box feature over here on the left. And with Jamboard, because it is a Google product, you do have the ability to share. Anyone with a link can look at this. They can share it directly with you. But the most efficient way to probably do this would be to go instead to It's Learning, and It's Learning does have Jamboard integrations now. Benefit of that is that you don't have to tell students to go and click File, make a copy, and they make their own copies. You can use It's Learning to send students their own editable copy on its own. There's minimal instructions you have to provide to them. So the way to do that would be to create an It's Learning assignment, and we're going to add this Jamboard file here as an attachment and then select it so that it makes a copy for each student. And I'm just going to show you how to do that because this Jamboard piece is fairly new, and I want to make sure you know how to do this so you can leverage this improved, efficient workflow as much as possible. You would give your assignment a name. It's typical. Type out your instructions there as you need to. Over here on the right-hand side, configure your deadline if you have one, and other features. And then right at the bottom here where it says Add Files, we're going to select Google Drive. If you haven't done this before, you probably will be prompted to pair your Google Drive. If you've already paired it, then you can search your Google Drive for that Jamboard file. That's what I'm going to do. Which one doesn't belong? Math. All right. It attaches it, and then by default, it's always set to students can view. That does not give them their own editable copy, so we're going to change that to make a copy for each student, and then create assignment. All right, so that usually does take a few minutes to load, but once it has loaded, we can see here it's attached. And I'm actually going to toggle over into student view just so I can show you what this looks like for the student perspective so you can see the benefit of doing this. The next few examples of using Jamboard in a new way, I'll reference this, but I won't walk through on all of those on how to do this specific process with its learning again. So this is what the student would see. They just see answer assignment and they see that's attached there. And then when they click this resource, it does take a minute because it's working to create a Jamboard file for this student that is editable. It names it after the student and then saves that as their answer on its learning. They do have to go back and click submit. Otherwise, it's just going to show that they didn't submit their work, that they opened the assignment. So they still need to go back and click submit whenever they're finished, but it keeps it stored there so they don't have to keep digging through their Google Drive to find it. So if you notice, it named it after me. I'm in the student view right now, so I can go through and work on my assignment, do what I need to do. And whenever I'm finished, I come back here to It's Learning and I just click submit and I'm done. So that's the benefit of using this kind of combined with It's Learning. If you plan on having a lot of students work together or work on their own, it's a really efficient way to get the resource to them without having to guide them through the whole process to make copies. So that is one fresh idea to use with Jamboard. Other ways you could do this, perhaps you show them pictures of vocabulary terms and it's up to them to apply their understanding of the definitions and then explain why something doesn't belong. If you're a social studies teacher, you could do historical figures. If you're a science teacher, maybe it's different elements in the periodic table and you're asking students which ones belong with each other and which ones don't. It's a pretty thought-provoking prompt and there's lots of examples there for science and for math. And it's really fun. All right, next one is a fun twist on a crowd favorite, Would You Rather? And this one is called Would You Rather and Why? And it's essentially building on that basic question, would you rather, which is an either or, and asking students to explain their thinking. So again, I do have a few math examples here. Really tried to give my math teacher something to work with, but you can again use this in any subject area. These specific ones are fun because they ask students to do some calculations and then explain their calculations and their thinking. So again, it's a Jamboard file. It's linked there for you to utilize. Go through that whole process like I just told you about with It's Learning and send students their own copy. And this one's pretty basic. I actually did not set this as a picture background. This is the plain background, but you could customize it as you need to. And I just added pictures on here, and this is what my students would get. So in this one, the students are doing the math calculation here to figure out which one is the better pool. And then they would explain their thinking here by typing it out. Maybe they draw out an explanation of their calculations. They could use a little pencil button here and draw out their calculation as they need to and add additional frames and slides as they might. So technically you could do this on Google Slides if you wanted to. Honestly, any of these examples I show you could be Jamboard or Google Slides. What I have noticed is that teachers, especially math teachers, like to gravitate to Jamboard for some instances because there is the ability to draw out equations and it's not as difficult to type out math equations and functions on this as it is Google Slides. And if you feel like your students are a little overwhelmed when they go into slides because there's too many buttons, too many things to do, this would be a good initial tool to use before you have them use some more advanced Google Slides functions because you have options here, but it's a little bit more limited in what you can do. All right. The last example here for Jamboard is probably the most commonly seen thing that I've seen in terms of using Jamboard for digital manipulatives because you can drag and drop and move things around so easily. This is a little bit of a twist on that by adding an image as a background on Jamboard, which you couldn't do before. So as I was mentioning earlier with Jamboard, it can be kind of tricky sometimes. It was for a lot of teachers because they wanted to use this tool because they like how simple it is, how you can add different layers and pieces. But what they ran into is because you couldn't put in a picture as a background, you'd put this awesome diagram on there and then students could manipulate it and move it around. And that's not what teachers wanted. So this allows you now to set a picture as a background. It can be any picture, it could be a diagram that you've made or when you find elsewhere. And then students just add their answers and layers on top of it. So I have a few examples here. And again, I linked the additional getting started steps as well. But the fun thing to do is to add a GIF or GIF, depending on how you pronounce it, as the background, so it's animated. It's a little bit more visually engaging for your students. And I did not make this GIF. I found it online. I just searched GIF of a heart, and this is what came up. There's lots of other ones on there if you're a health teacher. So what I could do here as a student or as a teacher is maybe before I send this to my students, I add some additional layers here. Maybe I put some arrows and things that they would point to, or maybe I leave that to my students to do. But I put these different parts here, and maybe the students identify which part is which. Or again, they can draw arrows out here because it is Jamboard. You can draw, and that's their answers, and they submit it to me on It's Learning. Or maybe this is just a note-taking tool for them. But I just did this by saving this picture, this animated image, and then I put that on here as the background, and it does save the animations. The other ones that are on here, here's an elementary example for my elementary teachers. Jamboard has gotten really popular with elementary teachers as well because they like the drag and drop elements. And this is the calendar. So a lot of us miss, if you're teaching virtually, you kind of miss having those moments with your students in class where you're going through this on a wall together. It's a little bit difficult to do that depending on the arrangement of your classroom, if your computer could be near that or not. So this is a good way you could do that even in an online environment. So you can drag and drop and move that around as you need to, and then move these different parts as you need to as well. For this specific teacher, she had been using this with her students, and the way that she did this was one student was given editing access to this file, and that student could drag and drop. The other way you could do is maybe the students are verbally explaining it, and then the teacher drags and drops. But there's other frames on here. There's more than just the calendar. There's weather, there's different seasons. There's lots of different examples here as well. So that is a pretty fun one that you could utilize. And these are all here for you to click file and make a copy and do as you need to. All right, so moving on to our next potential familiar tool, but used in a new way, is FlipGrid. So if you've not used FlipGrid before, it is a video response platform. It used to have a paid version and a free version, but now it's totally free for everyone. And it's really fun as an option for your students. It's pretty easy to use. There are some initial things you need to do to get started, especially if you plan on using this with your students often. You can set up a class and then students just join your class with the class code, and then you're pretty much good to go from there. But the cool thing with FlipGrid is that typically it's just been used for video responses, getting to know your students, like beginning of the year activities or something along those lines, and then reflections or exit tickets, maybe even as a way for students to turn in video projects. But there are some fun new ways that you can use this tried and true tool. And the first one is a flip hunt, and the other one is Grid Pals. So a flip hunt is a scavenger hunt with FlipGrid, and it's pretty fun. I've done this as training teachers, so I've used it with teachers as my students in a PD model, but I've seen lots of really amazing things happen when teachers use this with their students. So the idea is that FlipGrid is the space where students would submit proof of completing a task or submitting any explanation they have about any clues that they might find. So you can embed this and really pack in a lot of different learning activities within this. Perhaps you're using this to have students get familiar with a new technology tool you're using in class, or you use it for students to read different parts of a book. And when they get to parts of the book, they do this little FlipGrid flip hunt response. Or maybe they're collaborating with other students. You could use this in several different ways. It could be an individual activity or a group activity. You have some options. If maybe you're in more of a counseling role, or you're a dean in your school, or someone who manages kind of expectations in PBIS and that training for students, this could be a really fun thing to do, is a way for students to reflect and kind of reteach some of those PBIS practices. You can send students on a scavenger hunt of sorts, or maybe they're reflecting on the different PBIS expectations for your school, and this is the one common place where they submit their work. I did link on here just some guides and examples that teachers have used with this activity and just some tips for getting started. You do need to make sure you have a FlipGrid account set up first before you dive into using this tool. And I've linked tutorials on how to do that as well at the very end of this presentation. But again, it is totally free for you to use. And here are some examples. The first two examples that I have on here, the second two examples that I have on here are ones from when I use this with teachers, but it's the same concept as what you would do if you were using this with students. So for this one, it was for a technology committee. And the idea was to pack in a lot of new tech tools for these teachers to learn in a pretty fun, efficient way. So they worked in teams and they completed some of these different tasks here, and I made them pretty goofy. Sometimes they had to act out and do funny voices, or they had to act out what their school mascot was. They had to come up with a joke or something along those lines. They had to submit the reflection about a text that they read. So there's lots of different ways you can use this, and it's pretty fun and entertaining to do. So the way that I did this is I set up separate grids, and grids are your places where students would submit their video responses. You grab a link there and they can join as well. The awesome thing with FlipGrid is that there are lots of accessibility features built into it. It has an immersive reader by Microsoft, because Microsoft owns this product, built into the tool. So it will read text out loud to students, like this description right here. So this button is, it can translate it, add a picture dictionary. You can add supplemental resources as well. So links, videos, external websites, add anything you need to right here for students to complete this task. And then when students go to finish this assignment, they click the button here or right here. So it's pretty obvious for them. This works on cell phones, iPads, tablets, Chromebooks, Windows computers, any device FlipGrid works on as long as you have an internet connection. So here's some examples of what this looked like. And the fun thing with FlipGrid is that you can take a selfie, and that's your cover image for your response, and you can add stickers to that as well. And speaking from experience, make sure you build in some time for students to take that selfie and add their stickers, because they will definitely take full advantage of that. They like to add their funny stickers and things along those lines. So that is an example of how you could use FlipGrid, take students on a quick little scavenger hunt, whether it's a scavenger hunt into a text, resources you're learning about. It can be kind of a fun challenge for them. The other way to use FlipGrid in a new way is to connect your class and have global pen pals. So if you've been using FlipGrid for a few years, this has gone under some changes. It's definitely a little bit more robust right now than when I was in the classroom, and this feature was still fairly new. You can connect your class with others worldwide. Before I get too far into that, some people are like, I don't know if I want my students video chatting with people somewhere else. That's not what this is. It is connecting you as a teacher with another educator that has given permission for you to connect with them. FlipGrid vets all of these accounts and makes sure that they're legitimate. It is totally secure. It's not anything sketchy along those lines. I would not be showing this to you if I thought there was some danger here for that. And the cool thing with FlipGrid is that you can always moderate and kind of control what video responses are populated on a grid. So even if your students say something goofy, you can control whether the other class that you're working with can see that. So you have the ability to turn this on your profile. So if I go to FlipGrid, I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to log into my account here. And when I log into my free FlipGrid account, it's one of the tabs across the top. So here's all of the places where I have made those grids and things for people to turn in their work. Across the top is where I click Grid Pals. And this is where you have the option to make your profile active so other educators can connect with you, or hidden. By default, your profile will be turned on to hidden, so no one can connect with you. So if you click active, they can. And it's not like they see every single piece of personal information out there. So to show you an example here, if I wanted to connect with an educator here, these little green plus marks mean that it's a teacher there. So as you can see, there are a lot, and the map just keeps populating with more. The way that I would connect with this person is I would send an invite, and that sends an email to whatever email account you have paired with your FlipGrid account. Not a phone number, nothing along those lines, just your email, your school email that you have associated here. So if you get requests from teachers, you can ignore them or you can respond. This is just a fun option there. You can sort from different grade levels. So if you wanted to connect with someone that is specifically teaching the same age of students that you are, you could do that. You could even sort by subject. You could even search for a specific educator's name if you already know of someone. And if you zoom out on this map, it is lagging a little bit here because it's still populating all those FlipGrid users. If I wanted to connect with someone somewhere else, I could totally do that, right? There's some other users here than just those in the United States. So I could connect with them there. I have used this feature before, and like I said, FlipGrid was still fairly new when I did this, and this feature was still fairly new, so there were not all of these people across the world that you could connect with. I connected with a class in Iowa. It was still really fun, though. It wasn't, the whole global experience that I envisioned having with my students initially, but it was still fun, and my students felt like they had made some new friends a few states away. So this is a fun option for you, and it could be a kind of a different thing for you and your students, whether you choose to connect from a different country or students within the United States. So that is what I had for fun ideas on FlipGrid. The next one we're going to go over in the last series before this session ends is Google Slides. So Google Slides is probably one of the more tried and true tools that teachers gravitate towards when it comes to lesson planning. I like to call it the Swiss Army knife of Google tools and really digital tools in general, because there's so many different ways that you can use this one tool. And that's what some of these examples are. So typically teachers maybe use Google Slides for hyperdocs, so putting all their lesson materials and links in one place, or they use it as a visual tool to support direct instruction or a lecture, for students' group slide presentations, or for note-taking tools for students if they like to take digital notes. So the examples that I'm going to show you are taking some of those traditional ways that we've used Google Slides, but putting a spin on them. So there's a little bit more collaboration with your students, there's more engagement. It could be a fun way to spice up presentation. So it's not just a static, typical slideshow presentation where everyone's just kind of passively watching there. It's a little bit more fun. And these would work in any type of context that you're teaching it right now, whether you're in person, you're virtual, or you're a blend of both. So this first one here is called Thin Slides. So I want to give a shout out to Corey Williams. She's the one who introduced me to this concept, and I just kind of stole some of her examples here and put them on there. So I wanted to give due credit to her. This is a really great activity that takes very little time, and it's designed to be a short burst activity. It's not supposed to last hours. It's not supposed to last, honestly, more than about 5 minutes. It's a very short, quick thing. And this specific activity is from a book called EDU Protocols or Edu Protocols by John Corripo and Marlena Hayburn. I've linked that on the last slide in this presentation, so you can borrow some of their ideas. They have a lot of free templates and examples on their website if you're curious about those, but didn't necessarily want to buy the book itself. You can get a lot from their website for free. So thin slides are a fun activity. You can use this as a reflection, a get to know you activity, or even as a lesson starter to kind of reflect on what you learned from the day before or to wrap up a lesson. And the idea here is that it's a short amount of time. Everyone's working on one class shared slide deck. Everyone has editing access, and they're required to include something on one slide that they're responsible for. So I've linked ideas here that Corey so kindly put together and some examples of how she's seen teachers use it. But here are some examples from when we've used this with teachers to give them an idea of how to use this. They could use this with their students. So everyone had editing access to this one slideshow. And on the left-hand side, you pick one slide that's yours and you kind of write your name on it to claim it. So you could add lots of slides here for enough for your whole entire class period. And students know that when someone else's name on that slide, that's their slide. They shouldn't mess with it. And specifically, it's helpful if you include some things on what the expectations are. What are students supposed to put on the slide that's yours? So for this example, they had to put their name, where and what they teach, and a picture and a word to describe themselves. So we took maybe 3-4 minutes to do this. Everyone had editing access. They added their content and added it pretty quickly. And then we went over it and everyone could view each other's slides. So ways that you could do this with your students is maybe you have it summarize content from the day before, or it's kind of a way to end the lesson, or it's getting to know each other. It can be tied to your content or not. It could be something totally off the wall, goofy, just to get class going for the day and to take a brain break as well. The next one is taking a group slideshow presentation and making it a little bit more fun and different for your students. So surely, especially if you're a high school teacher, your students have done some type of group slides presentation before, and they can get kind of boring for students after a while. So this is a fun twist on that. And it's based off of the show Iron Chef, if you've seen that before. This is another example from that book I was talking about a few minutes ago. And it's kind of like a jigsaw activity with a twist. So on the TV show Iron Chef, the chefs are working to make a meal. They have a certain time limit, so they're working under a time constraint. And that's a piece of this, is that you set the time frame that students are going to be working on this assignment. It's not supposed to be days, but you could do that if you wanted to. But the idea is that they have a set amount of time that they're working. And on the show Iron Chef, they give the chefs a certain ingredient that they have to include in their recipe and in their dish. So for this, you decide what the secret ingredient is that your students have to include in their slideshow presentation. On Iron Chef, typically you have someone who's responsible for the different parts of the meal. So for this, you could tell students this is their assigned roles. You put them in groups of 4. Each person has a specific role. Maybe they all work on one specific slide. You could do that, but there's always the one fun secret ingredient. So for some of the examples here, maybe the secret ingredient is a technology tool that they have to include. Maybe it's a certain type of content piece they have to include. Maybe they're assigned a specific vocab board and they have to use that in their presentation, or they have to come up with some type of activity that's interactive for the people who are watching their presentation when they present it. So the examples here is that in this social studies example, and these are all social studies ones, just primarily because this is an activity that I had used with students, and I pulled these from other social studies teachers that I know have used them, but this could be applicable to other content areas as well. This one is where Pear Deck was a secret ingredient. So students made Pear Deck questions and they put those into their slides presentation. They were required to do that so that whenever they presented this to the class, the students had interactive Pear Deck questions for their classmates to answer, which made it a little bit more of a lively presentation than just sitting there and passively watching the students present on their assigned topic. This one, the students had to use an animated image GIF as the secret ingredient. So they were required to include at least one of those in their presentation. And then this one, the students had to come up with a quiz via quizzes to include in their presentation as well. So building in that assessment piece at the end of the presentation. So what this essentially does is your students are not only the experts on their topic and really the teachers for the topic, teaching your other students about it, but they're also engaging in higher learning because they're creating some type of assessment or formative assessment activity to go along with it if you choose that to be the secret ingredient they have to include. So here are the examples, and the examples that I gave you are not the finished student product. I did not have permission to include those, but I did want to give you the example of what this looks like when the teacher unveiled this project with the students and how you can copy some of these examples and use these instructional pieces whenever you decide to do this with your students in the classroom. So this specific thing here is the amount of time the students would be working on this, their short presentation, and then assigned roles for the students to work on there, and then resources related to it, as well as the secret ingredient the students had to include and where to go to get some of those secret ingredients. So that is a fun way to spice up your slides presentations and group project presentations in your class. All right, the last one for Google Slides is another higher order thinking. This one could be done individually or as a group, and it's called hexagonal thinking. And I did link on here an article about the benefits of this. It could be used as a brainstorming tool, as a reflection tool. It's a little bit of a spin on concept mapping. And the benefit of doing this is the way it works is you have these little hexagon shapes, and they're connected. It almost looks like a little beehive here, or honeycombs. And students would write words in these different text boxes and basically say and explain why these terms are connected. So ideally, if you have two terms that are touching here, there's some type of connection between them. So it's not only having students have an understanding of these vocab terms, they have to understand the relationships between them. And you could have students explain this verbally to you. You could have them type it out, like what this example was, but it's engaging in a little bit more of a layered thinking task, simply just writing out definitions. This could help them reflect on vocab terms in a lesson. Maybe it's even a step beyond that, where students are doing some type of presentation where they fill out all these terms. This is what that could look like. And there are some example here that you could copy from and kind of have students fill in with their own terms. So that is an example there of how you could use kind of vocab and Google Slides together for a more higher order thinking task. So that is all I had for this session. I know I probably just went over my 30 minutes a little bit. I did the same when I presented this live. I know we didn't get through all of the tools that I had in my slideshow. primarily because I wanted to gauge this presentation based on what the attendees wanted to get out of it. If I didn't go over a tool in this video that you wanted to learn about, the resources are there for you to access, and you can always ask me questions. Before I wrap this up, I do want to have you consider a goal for yourself. So in the theme of New Year's resolutions and new tools, familiar tools in new ways, think of a new goal for yourself to integrate one of the ideas that you heard about today or one of the tools and how you could apply that in your role and in your learning environment. If you have any questions, please let me know. My email is there. You will have the ability to get professional growth points after this video. And there are some additional resources there that are mentioned and referenced in my presentation to get you started with these tools or to do some additional digging. And thank you all for attending. I'm excited that you were here, and I hope you enjoyed this session.